This is the moment ICE became the largest, most well-funded federal law enforcement agency in U.S. history, empowered by the 2025 One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So understanding its current trajectory, its economic ripple effects, and the escalating constitutional crisis on American streets, it's no longer just a policy debate.
No, not at all.
It is a necessity for understanding the country we woke up in this morning.
It really feels like a pivot point, doesn't it? I mean, we are looking at a fundamental shift in how domestic authority is exercised. And the sources we have today, well, they suggest the consequences are going to be far, far more complex than just enforcement versus open borders.
So much more complex.
It's like it's rewriting the rules of the game in real time.
It is. And look, before we get into the stacks of paper, and we have a lot of them today, really a mountain of them, we have to address the context immediately.
Yeah.
We're recording this on Wednesday, January 28, 2026, and it has been a very, very heavy week.
Unbelievably so.
Just 4 days ago, on January 24th, the news broke out of Minneapolis that Alex Preddy, an ICU nurse, was shot and killed by an ICE officer.
And that came barely 2 weeks after the killing of Renee Nicole Good on January 7th, also in Minnesota. The atmosphere right now is just, it's incredibly charged.
It's electric.
In a bad way.
It is. We are seeing reports of military deployments. This Operation Metro Surge is in full swing. And frankly, it feels like the sources are describing a different country than the one we were discussing even, 2 years ago?
It really does. It feels like the temperature has been dialed up to a breaking point. And that's exactly why we wanted to do this deep dive today. Our mission isn't just to look at the headlines, because the headlines are coming at us too fast and they're too reactive. We want to unpack the stack of sources we've pulled together to understand the machinery behind this.
Get to the why. Get to the why and the how. We've got deep economic studies on labor markets from Chloe East. We have legal analysis from the Yale Law Journal and the NYU Review of Law and Social Change. And we have the most current 2026 wiki reports on what's happening on the ground.
A really broad spectrum of material.
And we need to answer a big question. How did an agency created for national security evolve into what critics are now calling a rogue agency? And what does the hard data actually say about its impact on American workers and our safety?
It is the question of the hour. I mean, it's the question. And to answer it, we have to start with the landscape right now, the reality of January 2026. Because if you haven't been paying close attention to the legislative fine print, you might have missed how we got here so fast.
Okay, let's unpack this. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That's the actual name, right? I still feel ridiculous saying it.
That is the actual name. It passed in July 2025. And despite the, let's call it creative naming convention.
That's a kind way to put it.
The impact was deadly serious. Essentially, it was a financial injection that changed absolutely everything. Before this act, ICE was a large agency. It was significant, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But after this act, ICE became larger than the entire federal prison system.
Wow.
It is now larger than any other federal law enforcement agency in United States history.
Just pause on that for a second. Larger than the FBI. Larger than the DEA.
The marshals?
Larger than all of them. Combined, their budgets might be competitive, but as a single entity, ICE is now the behemoth. And the funding mechanisms within the bill are what make it so distinct. We aren't just talking about keeping the lights on.
This isn't just a cost of living increase.
No. The sources highlight billions in funding specifically allocated for the expansion of detention facilities and deportation operations. It's an infrastructure build-out. They're not just hiring more people, they're building the entire ecosystem for this new scale.
So more beds, more processing centers, more everything. More everything. Which is a huge part of the story. But the thing that really stood out to me in the sources, and this is something I think people see on their screens but maybe don't fully register, is the recruitment drive.
Oh, yeah?
They aren't just putting up "we're hiring" signs at the local job fair. This is a whole different level.
No. This is something else entirely.
The sources describe a wartime recruitment campaign. That is the terminology they are using internally.
Wartime.
Wartime. They have a budget of $100 million. Just for recruitment marketing, in a single year.
$100 million.
To put that in perspective, that is a massive ad spend for any corporation, let alone a government agency. And the incentives, they're incredibly specific and aggressive.
Let's talk about those. They're offering $50,000 sign-on bonuses.
$50,000 cash up front.
Which is life-changing money for a lot of people. That's a down payment on a house in many parts of the country.
It is. It's a huge lure.
Yeah.
But then there's the kicker, the part that I think is actually more strategic.
The loan forgiveness.
The loan forgiveness.
Right, $60,000 in college, loan forgiveness. But it's not for everyone, is it? There's a catch.
No, and this is where you see the strategy. Look at the targeting. That forgiveness is specifically targeting sworn police officers to get them to switch over to ICE.
So they are actively headhunting local cops
Yeah.
from cities and towns all across the country.
Precisely. They are poaching trained, experienced law enforcement personnel from local jurisdictions and pulling them into the federal immigration apparatus. You have to think about the downstream effect of that.
It's a brain drain.
It's a massive brain drain from local community policing into federal enforcement. You have local police departments, which are often already struggling with staffing, right?
Constantly.
And now they're losing their experienced officers, their sergeants, their detectives to a federal agency because the federal agency can write a check that the local city council just, they can't match it.
It's impossible to compete with that.
Yeah.
And the marketing strategy itself is, well, it's aggressive. It feels less like a government PSA and more like a trailer for a video game.
That's a great way to put it. The sources back that up completely. The reports say these ads are running on Hulu, Spotify, HBO Max, all the mainstream platforms you'd expect.
So you're watching a show and suddenly an ICE ad.
Exactly. But it's the targeting that gets really, really interesting. They are geo-targeting people who are interested in tactical gear.
Okay, so people buying certain brands online, that sort of thing.
Right. They're targeting people who listen to what the sources describe as patriotic podcasts, and this one really stands out, fans of the UFC.
Why the UFC? I mean, I watch fights sometimes, but I don't necessarily want to raid a house at 5 in the morning.
It's about a psychographic profile. They are looking for a specific mindset. It's not about being a fan of a sport. It's about what that fandom signals to their marketing algorithms.
Aggression, masculinity.
A certain kind of warrior ethos, maybe?
Yeah.
And the sources indicate that official recruitment materials are utilizing memes, these edgy online culture memes.
The government is using memes to recruit federal agents.
They're using memes, online influencers, and in some really controversial cases, slogans and imagery that are closely associated with white nationalist rhetoric.
That's a very serious charge.
It is, but it's in the reports. It's a deliberate branding choice to frame the job not as administrative law enforcement, but as a form of combat, a domestic war. They aren't looking for social workers. They are looking for warriors.
Which leads us directly to the rhetoric of immunity. Because if you are recruiting people for a war, you have to give them the rules of engagement. And usually in a war, the rules are different than on a city street.
Fundamentally different.
We have this quote from Stephen Miller, who's been a key architect of this policy, from October 2025. This was in response to Illinois trying to push back against Operation Midway Blitz.
Right. And this quote, it's a lot. You really have to hear the words to understand the shift. Miller stated, and I'm quoting the source here, to all IC officers, you have federal immunity in the conduct of your duties.
Full stop.
Then he continues, anybody who lays a hand on you or tries to stop you or tries to obstruct you is committing a felony.
He went on to say that includes city officials, didn't he? He was very specific about that.
Yes, he explicitly called them out. No city official, no state official can prevent you from fulfilling your legal obligations. It is a declaration of absolute supremacy.
It's not just a policy statement, it's a threat.
It is. The administration is arguing that in the conduct of these operations, ICE is effectively untouchable by local law, by state law, by anyone.
So if a mayor stands in the doorway of a church and says you can't come in here without a warrant, Miller is saying arrest the mayor.
Effectively, yes. That is the direct implication. It's a total override of local jurisdiction and, frankly, of the separation of powers.
So what does this all mean? We have a massive, well-funded force recruited with wartime messaging and told they have total immunity. It feels like a pressure cooker.
It is.
But to understand how we got to this boiling point in 2026, we have to go back. We have to look at the original sin of how this agency was designed, because it wasn't always like this.
We do. And this is where the Yale Law Journal piece is so illuminating. It's essential reading. It takes us back to the aftermath of 9/11, the Homeland Security Act of 2002.
Before that, we had the INS, right? The Immigration and Naturalization Service. My grandparents dealt with the INS.
Correct. The INS was under the Department of Justice. And crucially, it had a dual mission. This is the part that I think most people forget.
Okay.
It combined service, helping people become citizens, processing paperwork, visas, the whole welcome to America part with enforcement. It was all under one roof.
So the same agency that arrested you might also be the one processing your cousin's green card application. That seems complicated.
It was complicated, but there was a balance, or at least a tension, between service and enforcement. The agency had to, on some level, understand the immigrant as a person seeking a new life, not just as a potential rule breaker or a docket number.
There was a humanizing element built into the structure.
You could argue that. But the Homeland Security Act it took a cleaver to that structure. It split that mission wide open.
How so?
They took the service part and moved it to a new agency, USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they took the enforcement part and created ICE and CBP and put them under the newly created Department of Homeland Security.
And DHS is a counterterrorism agency. That was the whole point of creating it after 9/11. It was about preventing another attack.
That is the absolute key. By moving immigration enforcement into DHS, the structural message from day one was, immigration is a national security threat. It framed the entire issue through the lens of counterterrorism.
So every person crossing the border is now viewed, by default, through the same lens you'd use for al-Qaeda.
That's the framework. The Yale source argues that ICE was fundamentally ill-conceived from its inception because it was designed to be solely focused on punitive enforcement without the balancing influence of that service mission.
It's like taking a police department, firing all the community liaison officers, firing the detectives who solve burglaries, and just keeping the SWAT team.
Right.
And then telling the SWAT team that everyone outside is a potential terrorist.
That is a very evocative way to put it, but structurally it's not far off.
Right.
The agency lost its service DNA. And it's not just the structure, it's the culture that evolves from that structure over 20 years.
Which brings us to this other source, the NYU Review of Law and Social Change article by Kari Hong. She argues the agency is, and this is a quote, infected with a culture that eschews good governance.
That's a very academic way of putting it.
It is. What does that actually mean?
It means a culture that actively avoids transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. And she uses that comparison to the military, which I found really fascinating, especially given the wartime recruitment we see in 2026.
Explain that comparison.
Okay, so the military has the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. It's an entire body of law that governs the armed forces.
Right.
If a soldier obeys an unlawful order, if they shoot a civilian intentionally, if they plunder a village, they can be court-martialed. There is a code of honor, a system of internal discipline that, imperfect as it may be, is designed to incentivize integrity and prevent atrocities.
And soldiers are taught that they have a duty to disobey illegal orders.
Right. That's a core tenet of military ethics. And she argues ICE doesn't have that. There is no equivalent to a court-martial. There isn't a deeply ingrained internal discipline code that punishes agents for crossing ethical lines in the same way.
So, without that internal check, what happens?
She calls their tactics theatrics of intimidation. The argument is that without a strong internal ethical framework, you get a culture where cruelty becomes the point, where the cruelty is a feature, not a bug, because it's viewed as deterrence.
Theatrics of intimidation, that sticks with you. It implies that the scariness, the terror of the raid itself is part of the strategy.
Exactly. If the process is terrifying, the logic goes, people will stop coming. But as we know, the drivers of migration are usually about survival fleeing, violence, famine, collapse, so deterrence has its limits.
Okay, so we have a structural flaw from 2002 compounding with a cultural issue, leading to the massive expansion and the rhetoric of immunity in 2025 and 2026.
It's a perfect storm.
But here is where it gets really, really interesting, and maybe a little counterintuitive for a lot of people listening. We need to talk about the economics, because the one big beautiful bill in this whole surge was sold on the premise of economic nationalism.
Yes, protecting American jobs. That is always the headline. It's the go-to justification.
The standard talking point, and we hear this constantly from all sides at different times, is undocumented immigrants are taking American jobs. If we deport them, those jobs open up for citizens and wages go up for everyone.
It's simple supply and demand, right? If you have fewer workers, the remaining workers are worth more. It makes perfect sense on a bumper sticker.
It feels like common sense. But we have a deep dive study here by Chloe East, an economist, looking at the labor market effects of the Secure Communities program. This was a massive data project that looked at what actually happens to employment when ICE enforcement ramps up in a community.
And this wasn't a theoretical model. This was looking at real-world data from counties across the U.S. that implemented this program at different times.
So what were the findings? Did it work?
Well, it found that strictly enforcing these programs did reduce the employment of likely undocumented men, as you might expect. If you deport people, they stop showing up for work.
Okay, so that part of it works.
Right. But, and this is the big but that changes the entire conversation, it also reduced the employment of low-educated citizen men.
Wait. Let's pause on that. You're saying that kicking out undocumented workers made U.S. citizens lose their jobs.
That's what the data shows. Specifically, it hurt low-skilled U.S. citizens, the very demographic that the protectionist argument claims to be saving.
How? How is that possible? Why would a citizen lose their job because an undocumented worker was deported? It feels like it should be the opposite.
It comes down to two economic concepts that are a bit jargony, but the idea is simple: substitutability and complementarity.
Okay, break that down.
The taking our jobs argument assumes that an undocumented worker and a citizen worker are perfect substitutes, like swapping a red apple for a green apple. If the red apple is gone, you just buy the green apple. The job is the apple.
Okay, makes sense.
But the data suggests they are often complements. They aren't two types of apples. They are more like tires and an engine. You need both for the car to run.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Think about a construction site. It's a classic example. You might have undocumented workers doing the drywall and the framing, very physically demanding, often lower paid work. And you might have U.S. citizens working as the electricians, the plumbers, the site foremen.
Right, different jobs on the same site.
These jobs rely on each other. If ICE raids that site and removes the drywall crew, the entire project grinds to a halt. The citizen electrician can't come in and wire a wall that isn't there. The citizen foreman has no one to supervise. The project gets delayed, costs overrun, or maybe the whole construction company goes bust.
So the citizen electrician loses work because the undocumented drywaller is gone.
Precisely. That is a labor demand shock. The entire demand for labor on that site shrinks. The study found that a 1% increase in the undocumented population share prior to enforcement was actually associated with negative employment outcomes for citizens once enforcement ramped up.
So basically, removing the undocumented workforce shrank the local economy enough to hurt the citizens working alongside them.
It shrank the pie for everybody. Let's bring this down to specific industries. The NYU source you mentioned earlier, it brings up a few really good examples.
The racing industry in California.
Yeah, think about that. Who grooms the horses? Who mucks out the stalls? It's incredibly hard physical labor that happens at all hours. If that workforce disappears, the whole industry is in jeopardy. The trainers, the jockeys, the vets, many of whom are citizens, their jobs are at risk.
And dairy farms in Idaho.
A great example. It is 247 work. It is messy. It is physically exhausting. It's not a job that has a long line of applicants. If you deport the workforce that milks the cows, you don't suddenly have a line of U.S. citizens applying for those jobs at those wages.
So what happens to the farm?
The farm scales down. They sell the cows. They buy automated milkers, which are incredibly expensive and might put them out of business, or they just go under. And then the local feed supplier, a citizen job. The milk truck driver, a citizen job. The local vet, a citizen job. They all lose business.
And the third example was crab picking in North Carolina.
A brutal seasonal job that entire coastal economies depend on. The data just suggests over and over that these workers are integrated into the economy in a way that when you rip them out, the whole structure starts to wobble.
So the economic argument that enforcement makes us richer is directly challenged by this data.
It's not just challenged, it's pretty much refuted. You create an economic contraction. There's a quote in The Guardian that says, "We need to divest from the logic that violence makes us safer." But the sources here imply we also need to divest from the logic that mass deportation makes us wealthier.
It's a lose-lose. Speaking of losing, let's move on. The human toll. And again, like the economic section, we aren't just talking about the undocumented population here. We are talking about United States citizens.
We are, and this is a side of the story that gets almost no airtime. There's a study from PubMed utilizing 2019 data, so this was pre-2026 crisis, but the trend line is clear. It looked at the mental health of U.S. citizens.
Not immigrants.
U.S. citizens. And what it found was that immigration enforcement is linked to significantly higher rates of anxiety and depression among U.S. citizen adults, particularly Latinos.
How does that work? How do they measure that?
They surveyed people and asked, essentially, do you know someone, a friend, a family member, a coworker, who has been detained or deported? And they correlated that with reported mental health symptoms.
And just knowing someone creates a measurable health crisis in citizens.
It's the spillover effect. It's the trauma of the community. About 31% of the participants in that study reported knowing someone who had been detained or deported. For Latinos, that number is obviously much, much higher.
So you have entire communities of American citizens living in constant fear that their grandmother, their neighbor, or their spouse, who might be undocumented, could be taken away at any moment.
It's a state of chronic stress. It creates a public health crisis within the voting population, and that was based on 2019 data.
Right. Before the one big beautiful bill, before Operation Metro Surge.
Before the temperature was turned all the way up. So fast forward to today, January 2026. The conditions have to be exacerbating that stress. We have reports from the ACLU and The Guardian about the conditions inside these new detention centers.
Specifically, Alligator Alcatraz in Florida.
That name alone, Alligator Alcatraz. It chills the blood. It sounds like something from a dystopian movie.
It does, but it's a real place.
And the reports coming out of there and from Fort Bliss in Texas are deeply disturbing. We have consistent allegations of detainees being deprived of food, water, and showers for extended periods.
And there was a specific allegation regarding Muslim detainees that really stood out to me as, well, just gratuitously cruel.
Yes. The reports allege that Muslim detainees are being systematically forced to choose between pork or expired meals.
So violate your core religious beliefs or get food poisoning.
That is the choice being presented, according to these sources. And this connects directly back to that culture of cruelty argument from the Yale paper.
Right.
The cruelty isn't an accident. It isn't just, oh, we ran out of chicken today. Critics argue it's a feature of the deterrence strategy. If you make the experience of being in custody a living hell, the theory is it acts as a deterrent to others.
But again, if you are fleeing a cartel or a war zone, expired meals might not be the deterrent they think it is.
It likely isn't.
But it certainly radicalizes the conversation here at home. Which brings us to the Abolish ICE movement.
A movement that has really evolved. It started gaining traction around 2018 as documented by the Brennan Center. But in 2026, it has resurged with a completely different level of urgency and, frankly, a much broader base of support.
And I think there's a huge misconception here. When people hear abolish IC, they think open borders. They think anarchy, no rules, just chaos at the border.
That is the straw man argument that's always used to shut down the conversation. But if you actually look at the proposals, like the one in the Yale Law Journal source, they lay out a very detailed replacement system. They aren't saying do nothing. They are saying do something fundamentally different.
Okay, so what does that look like?
They break it down into 4 pillars.
Let's run through those because I think it's important for people to understand the actual proposal, not the caricature of it.
I agree. So Pillar 1, end detention and mass deportation. They argue these are inhumane, incredibly expensive, and as we just discussed, economically destructive.
Okay, so what do you do instead?
Pillar 2, focus on voluntary compliance. And they use an interesting model here. They say, think of it like the IRS.
The IRS. That's not a comparison I would have expected.
Well, think about it. Most people pay their taxes. Why? It's not because they're afraid an IRS SWAT team is going to kick down their door.
Right. It's because you get notices, there are fines, there are penalties.
Exactly. It's a system of civil compliance. It's bureaucratic, not militaristic. The argument is, why not treat immigration violations, which are, for the most part, civil violations, the same way?
So treating it like a civil infraction rather than a violent crime, which is what it is, legally.
For the most part, yes. Then Pillar 3 is to address the root causes. Why are people leaving their homes in the first place? And Pillar 4 is to decriminalize migration itself.
It's a complete shift in philosophy, from punishment to administration.
It is. But here's the thing that really surprised me in the sources. It's not just academics at Yale or activists on the street saying the system is broken. It's the agents themselves.
What do you mean?
This is a crucial piece of history that gets forgotten. In 2018, 19 special agents in charge from Homeland Security Investigations, that's the investigative arm of ICE, wrote a letter.
To who?
To the Secretary of Homeland Security. 19
of them. That's a lot of brass. That's a mutiny.
It was a significant revert from the inside, and they asked to separate HSI from ICE. They essentially wanted a divorce.
Why? What was their reasoning?
They said the toxic reputation of ERO enforcement and removal operations, the deportation force, was ruining their ability to do their actual jobs.
How so?
Well, imagine you are an HSI agent. Your job isn't deporting nannies and gardeners. Your job is busting transnational criminal organizations, child trafficking rings, fentanyl smugglers, intellectual property theft. Big, serious international crime. To
Okay.
do that job, you need witnesses. You need informants. You need people in immigrant communities to trust you and talk to you. But if you walk into a neighborhood wearing a jacket that says ICE, and that community is terrified of ICE because they associate it with their grandmother getting deported.
They shut down. No one talks to you.
Exactly. The agents argued that the reputation of the deportation force was blowing their cover and killing their most important investigations. They said the brand was toxic.
So the tough on immigration stance was actually making us less safe from trafficking in drugs.
That was their argument. The very people tasked with stopping the worst of the worst said that the agency's other mission was making their job impossible.
And yet here we are in 2026. No divorce.
No divorce. Instead, we have the surge. And the counter-reaction to the surge isn't just letters from agents anymore. It's becoming violent.
It is. The sources report attacks on ICE facilities this past year. We had the incident in Alvarado, Texas on July 4th, 2025.
Right. Fireworks were set off, vehicles were vandalized, and a gunman actually fired at police who responded.
And then the shooting at the Dallas field office in September. That was much more serious.
Much more. A gunman got inside and killed a detainee and injured several officers. These are tragic, violent escalations, and it shows how deep the fracture in the country is. We're splitting into two completely different realities regarding this agency.
The polling backs that up in a really stark way. We have data from the Pew Research Center in late 2025 showing a massive partisan divide.
It's a chasm. It's not a gap. It's a chasm.
Yes.
72% of Republicans view the agency favorably.
And on the other side?
78% of Democrats view it unfavorably. There is almost no middle ground left. One side sees a wartime protector keeping the country safe. The other side sees a rogue paramilitary force terrorizing communities.
And that clash isn't just happening in the streets or in the polls. It is happening in the courts. And this is where the legal nerds, and I say that with love, are freaking out. We need to talk about the constitutional conflicts.
This is the slow-moving earthquake underneath everything else. We are seeing a battle over sanctuary cities in the second Trump term that is rewriting the playbook on federalism.
Sanctuary cities have been around for a while, though. What's different now?
The legal strategy has shifted dramatically. The state court report highlights this. Previously, sanctuary cities relied on statutes or local ordinances, The City Council of Cambridge passed a law that says we won't help you.
And the federal government would sue, arguing federal law trumps city law.
Exactly, supremacy clause. But statutes can be overridden. Now, the battle is moving to state constitutions.
How does that work? How is that a stronger defense?
They are using the logic from a really interesting case, Johnson v. Wyoming. That was an abortion case where the Wyoming Supreme Court struck down abortion bans based on the state constitution's right to make personal health care decisions.
Right, I remember that. It was a pivot to state rights as a way to protect individual rights.
Exactly. And legal scholars are seeing states apply that same logic to immigration. States are asserting that their own due process clauses, which are embedded in their state constitutions, prevent them from cooperating with federal ICE detainers that lack probable cause.
So they are saying, it's not just that we don't want to help you, Mr. Federal Agent. It's that our state constitution, the highest law in our state, forbids us from holding this person for you without a proper judicial warrant.
Precisely. They're using the highest law of the state as a shield against federal overreach. It's a much more powerful legal argument.
And the escalation isn't just legal, it's physical. Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota resulted in state officials actually suing the Department of Homeland Security.
Because ICE is reportedly ignoring court orders. There was a situation in Los Angeles regarding racial profiling where a federal court ordered them to stop certain tactics, and reports indicate they simply ignored the order and kept doing it.
This raises the important question, doesn't it? The big one.
It does.
If a federal agency ignores judicial orders and claims total immunity from local laws and threatens to arrest local officials who get in their way, do we still have checks and balances?
That is the constitutional crisis in a nutshell. If the executive branch effectively says the courts cannot stop us and the states cannot stop us, then you are moving away from a system of law and into a system of raw power. The whole structure is in question.
It feels like the guardrails are bending to the breaking point.
They are definitely being stress tested to their absolute limit.
So let's try to summarize this, because we have covered a massive amount of ground. We have an agency, ICE, that was born out of 9/11 with what the sources call a structural flaw separating service from enforcement,
Right, and that put it on a national security counter-terror footing from day one.
which over 2 decades led to a culture that critics describe as lacking internal discipline or a code of honor, creating what they call theatrics of intimidation.
A culture of cruelty as a feature, not a bug.
Then, fast forward to 2025, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act pumps billions of dollars into this agency, making it the largest in U.S. history. And they launched this wartime recruitment drive targeting police and military fans with aggressive online propaganda.
And at the same time, they're told by the highest levels of government that they have total federal immunity.
And economically, the deep data from Chloe East shows that this mass enforcement strategy likely backfires. It hurts low-skilled American workers by disrupting the complementary nature of the labor market.
So we're spending billions of dollars to potentially lower the employment of our own citizens.
On top of that, on a human level, it's causing a measurable mental health crisis among citizens and creating conditions in detention centers like Alligator Alcatraz that human rights observers call a disaster.
All of which is leading to a violent backlash in 2026, with shootings on both sides and a constitutional showdown where states are trying to use their own constitutions to shield themselves from federal power.
It really is a diverging path. The sources present two very clear opposing models. The war model, which is what we have now, with immunity, mass deportation, the Metro Surge.
And the compliance model, the one proposed in the Yale piece with the 4 pillars, treating migration like a civil service issue like the IRS. And the tragedy is that the data we've looked at today suggests the war model comes with incredibly high costs, economic costs, human costs, and constitutional costs that extend far beyond the immigrant population. It hurts the very citizens it claims to protect.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought for the listener, something that kept nagging at me while reading these sources. We kept coming back to that military comparison. The military has a code of honor. They have the UCMJ, they have court-martials, they have a structure, however flawed, to prevent unlawful orders.
And ICE has memes and $50,000 signing bonuses.
Exactly. So here's the thought. If the military has a code of honor to prevent unlawful orders, but our largest domestic enforcement agency recruits with memes and claims total immunity, are we building a police force? Or are we building a paramilitary organization operating outside the law?
That is the question we all need to be asking.
If you want to understand the economic argument that defies all the usual talking points, go read Chloe East's paper on labor market effects. It is genuinely fascinating. And if you want to see the blueprint for what comes after ICE, check out that Yale Law Journal piece. It's all in the deep dive stack on our website.
Knowledge is the best defense.
Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there.